Taehyung, my ex-husband. The man I love, who left me 2 years ago without a backward glance. When I first saw him again, standing tall and handsome in the restaurant where I work as a baker, I nearly dropped the tray of bread I was carrying. I had no idea he owned the place. And just like that, my life got infinitely more complicated. He didn't just own the restaurant. I soon discovered he had quietly bought out the dance studio where I worked on weekends. That meant he had leverage over my every move. "I want you to work for me, Jungkook," he said with a smirk that made my blood boil and my knees weak all at once. "But I already do," I replied through gritted teeth, barely keeping my composure. "Not like this." Before I could protest, he laid out his plan. I was to be his personal chef, preparing his meals every day. His personal assistant, at his beck and call. His private dance instructor on Saturdays. His exclusive performer on Friday and Saturday nights. And as if that wasn't enough, he paid off the entirety of my father's debt. "Consider it a favor," he said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "You can repay me, in your own way." His terms were clear. I owed him everything. And worst of all, I couldn't refuse. The rules: Arrangement Rule 1. Address him formally during working hours. 2. Always fulfill his requests promptly, no matter how absurd. Never let emotions cloud my judgment. I told myself I could handle it. After all, it was just work. But Taehyung made it impossible to keep things professional. On my first day as his personal chef, he hovered in the kitchen, watching my every move. "You still remember my favorite dishes," he said, his deep voice a mix of surprise and amusement. I ignored the warmth creeping up my neck. "It's not that hard to remember when you used to demand them all the time." His lips curved into a knowing smile. Fair point. Being his dance instructor was even worse. Saturday mornings became a torturous blend of close proximity and unresolved tension. His hands were always just a little too steady on my waist, his gaze lingering too long. And then there were the nights when I performed exclusively for him. The intimacy of the situation became unbearable. "Dance for me, Jungkook," he said, sitting back in his chair, his piercing eyes following my every move. It was humiliating and intoxicating. The worst part wasn't the work, the debt, or even his constant presence. It was the feelings I thought I'd buried deep within me. Every smirk, every lingering touch, every stolen glance reignited something I had no right to feel. "You're enjoying this?" I snapped one night after he made me redo an entire choreography routine for the third time. Taehyung tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "And you're not?" I froze, my heart pounding. "This isn't a game, Taehyung. I'm doing this because I have no choice." His gaze softened for a brief moment, and I saw a flicker of something: regret? Pain? But just as quickly, it was gone. "You always have a choice, Jungkook," he said quietly. "You just don't see it yet." As weeks turned into months, our arrangement became something else entirely. The lines blurred, the tension thickened, and the feelings I swore I'd buried began to resurface with a vengeance. Taehyung was no longer just my ex-husband or my boss. He was my tormentor, my savior, my everything. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was falling for him all over again. But this time, I wasn't sure if I'd survive the fallout. The air felt suffocating as I stepped into the dimly lit suite, the scent of sandalwood and something faintly familiar filling the space. My duffel bag slipped from my hand onto the side table with a soft thud, but my attention was already pulled toward the man sitting in front of me. Taehyung. He wasn't just another client. He was my ex-husband, the man who had once been my everything and then became the source of my deepest heartbreak. And tonight, I wasn't just performing for him, I was giving him something I'd only done for special patrons. A private show. I clenched my fists to keep them from trembling as I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker. The first notes of a sultry track flowed through the room, smooth and hypnotic. Turning to face him, I forced myself to adopt the practiced composure I'd honed over the years. Taehyung sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting lazily on his thigh while the other held a glass of wine. His dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I began to move, my body finding the rhythm instinctively. Years of dancing had trained me well, but nothing could prepare me for the way his gaze stripped me bare, as though he could see past the polished routine and into the raw, vulnerable parts of me I tried to keep hidden. The room seemed to shrink as I danced, the plush carpet muffling my steps while the heat of his stare burned into me. "Why are you so far away?" His voice was low, steady, and laced with a challenge that made me falter for the briefest moment. I forced myself to stay in character, ignoring the sharp pang in my chest. "I'm supposed to keep my distance," says who. His tone was teasing now, a hint of amusement tugging at the corner of his lips. I hesitated, caught between wanting to maintain some semblance of control and the knowledge that I couldn't refuse him, not tonight. Swallowing my pride, I stepped closer, letting my movements carry me nearer to where he sat. His smile grew, subtle yet triumphant, as if he'd already won a battle I hadn't realized we were fighting. "Better," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the music. I turned away slightly, hoping to shield myself from the weight of his gaze, but before I could retreat further, I felt it, a hand, warm and firm, resting on my waist. I froze. The contact sent a shiver up my spine, my breath hitching as his thumb brushed against my side in a way that felt both deliberate and maddeningly casual. "Keep dancing," he murmured, his voice low and commanding. I obeyed, though my movements were no longer fluid. His touch anchored me, disrupting the careful detachment I relied on during performances like this. "You've changed," he said softly, his lips curving into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You've gotten better." I didn't respond, afraid my voice would betray me. Instead, I focused on the music, on the way my body moved despite the chaos churning inside me. But Taehyung wasn't done. "Do you know why I asked for this show?" Jungkook asked, his thumb tracing a slow, deliberate circle. I shook my head, unable to meet his gaze. "I miss seeing you like this," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Raw. Beautiful. Unapologetically yourself." His words cut through me, sharp and precise. My heart clenched, and I hated how much they affected me. This was supposed to be a transaction, a way to pay off my debt and nothing more. But with Taehyung, nothing was ever that simple. "Taehyung," I whispered, my voice trembling as I finally dared to look at him. "Yes." Jungkook. I swallowed hard, my emotions threatening to spill over. "Why are you doing this?" His thumb stilled, his expression softening. "Because I want you back." The air left my lungs in a rush, and I stared at him, stunned into silence. "I know I hurt you," he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "But I've never stopped wanting you. Never stopped loving you." I shook my head, stepping out of his grasp and putting some distance between us. You can't just say things like that. You can't come back into my life and act like nothing happened. I'm not, he said firmly, standing as he closed the space I'd just created. I know what I did. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm asking for it anyway. My heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, but I couldn't let myself fall into his orbit again, not after everything we'd been through. I can't, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't go through that again. Taehyung's jaw clenched, but he didn't press further. Instead, he stepped back, his hands falling to his sides as his gaze softened. Then just let me have tonight, he said, his voice a quiet plea. I hesitated, torn between the walls I'd built around myself and the part of me that still longed for him. Just tonight, I said finally, the words escaping before I could stop them. His lips curved into a small, almost relieved smile. That's all I need. As the music shifted to a softer melody, Taehyung held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, I took it, allowing him to pull me closer. And as we moved together in the dimly lit suite, I realized that no matter how hard I tried to resist, I was still dancing to his rhythm. Taehyung's confession hung heavy in the air, suffocating in its intensity. I want you back. 3 simple words that carried the weight of a past I wasn't sure I could revisit. I stepped back instinctively, breaking free from his grasp, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The music continued to play in the background, but the rhythm felt distant now, like a dream I was being pulled from. You can't just say things like that, I said, my voice shaky as I tried to mask the emotions threatening to spill over. Why not? Taehyung asked, his expression unyielding as he stood. He was tall, broad, and unapologetically commanding, the very embodiment of everything I'd tried to escape from. Because you left, I snapped, my frustration boiling over. You walked away without a word, Taehyung. You don't get to come back now and act like nothing happened. He didn't flinch at my words, his gaze steady and unwavering. I made a mistake, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. That's all you have to say. Taehyung took a step closer, and I instinctively moved back until my knees hit the edge of the sofa. He loomed over me, his presence overwhelming. But there was a vulnerability in his eyes that stopped me from pushing him away. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said softly. You had your whole life ahead of you, Jungkook. I didn't want to hold you back. I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. So you decided to make that choice for me? Without even asking how I felt, he clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists at his sides. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared of failing you, of not being enough for you. And by the time I realized I'd made the wrong choice, it was too late. His words pierced through me, stirring emotions I'd buried long ago. I hated that he could still affect me like this, that despite everything, a part of me wanted to believe him. You don't get to walk back into my life and pretend we can just pick up where we left off, I said, my voice trembling. I'm not pretending, he said, his voice firm. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Let me prove to you that I'm not the same man who left,